Hello and welcome to Samurai Class Women. This class has been moved to an online recorded format because I am home with my sick kid and I do not own video editing software, so if you hear coughing or anything happening, that's just the way it is. So in this class, we are going to kind of have three phases. First, we are going to look at samurai in general, and we're going to put samurai as a class of people into a historical and cultural context. Then we are going to get dressed with a focus on the Warring States period. And we'll talk a little bit about like before and after that as well, but that'll be the focus. And then we are going to specifically talk about women, their rights and responsibilities as a samurai class woman in particular. All right, so grab my notes. So it's important to know that in medieval Japan, we had basically two categories of nobles. There was the civic nobility, it's usually translated as civic nobility, called the Kuge. They didn't always have that name, but by the end of the Muromachi period and the Warring States period, they did. They were called the Kuge nobility, and then the martial nobility, which you would think of as a samurai. Basically, if you break down these two categories, I'm going to start with a quick recap of the civic nobility side. At the top of the civic nobility, we have the emperor, and he is his divine holiness. He is, the embodiment of the divine. He rules by the right of the gods or whatever. And over time, what you see is that the emperor slowly, as you go way back, goes from having political power, being really involved in making laws and decisions about how the country is run. And the further you come forward in time, the later and later in the period you get, the less power the emperor has, the more he is a ceremonial figure, just sort of being divine in the inner gardens of the palace. And gets basically all up in his divine embodiment phase. Similarly, the Kuge nobles, so you have the emperor, and under them is the Kuge nobility. And they also, as the further you come forward in time, the more power they lose. So by the time you get to the Warring States period, or Sengoku period, which is within the Muromachi period we're going to talk about, the more they are unlanded court nobility. And their duties are things like patronizing the arts, engaging in preserving Japanese culture and cultural traditions, such as like the tea ceremony is a widely known cultural tradition, right? So they're engaging in cultural traditions, they're supporting the emperor's ceremonial role, and they are engaging in like patronization of the arts. The other function of the Kuge nobility was administrative. They are functionally very much the administrative team of the kingdom. And so the prestige for a Kuge noble is gained through court appointments. So you have these hereditary court appointments, like being on the Council of Family Records, and your father was on the Council of Family Records, and when he retires or dies, you're going to be on the Council of Family Records. And if you do a really good job and you gain favor in court, you might be promoted to the chairman of the Council of Family Records, or commission or committee or whatever. And so they have a lot of administrative responsibilities. When you think of even down to like the local magistrate out in rural provinces, that is not a job that you turn in a resume for. That is a job that is granted to noble families and is hereditary until it is taken away or if they no longer have any appropriate heirs. It's important to note in I know we're going to focus on women more later, but in general, as an overview, Kuge class noblewomen lose the most power. They start out being able to serve on committees, being able to have a voice in councils. They are officially writing literature, not just poems to themselves about, oh, woe is me and my arranged marriage, but like collecting really serious literature, art, serving on committees, having political voice. Before the 8th or 9th century, we have multiple examples of female emperors. And then the more you go through time and the more patriarchy Japan imports from China, the more power the Kuge noblewomen lose, until eventually, by the time you get to the Warring States period, where I'm focusing, they're really talking about them as inner court flowers, used for political marriages, and they are expected to be seen and not heard unless they are performing. Geisha did not exist in the SCA period of medieval Japan, but the Kuge noblewomen towards, you know, what they became was basically what geisha are emulating. So Kuge noblewomen are going to be masters of cultural ceremonies like the tea ceremony, masters of the arts, speak many languages, perfect etiquette, all of these things, but they don't actually have power or a voice. The more you go, oh, hang on a second. Here's your cold pack. There you go. Now let's contrast that to the martial nobility. So that was all the Kuge class nobility. On the martial side, or the samurai side, the top begins with the head high general, which is called the shogun. And ostensibly, he is the emperor's general. He gets his power because it has been granted to him by the emperor. But the more you go through time again, the more the emperor is being relegated to representing divinity upon earth and doesn't actually dirty his hands with the chairs of leadership. And so the more you go through time, the more the shogun, that head high general, is actually the one ruling the country, enforcing laws, and wielding the power of the nation. Now, it's important to know that martial nobility actually had two primary functions. They had military functions as warriors and preserving the armies and those types of things, but they also had the function of land management. And so, especially agricultural land. So on the Kuge civic nobility side, the court nobility, if you did a good job, you got a higher court appointment. On the martial nobility side, if you did a good job, you would be given land. Like, oh, you did great in that battle, your family will be granted, or you will be granted 3 patties of rice, you know, or so many acres of dry farmland for wheat and fruit and stuff, right? So land management is the province of the martial nobility. And that makes it really easy to see why, as you go through time and the martial nobility are granted more and more land from the state, they are the ones with the real power, because they have the land management, especially agricultural land, and they have martial, like they're controlling the armies. So again, we do, depending on what exact year you're looking at, there are clashes potentially between the shogun and the emperor. If that emperor decides like, hey, it's my country, I want to rule some stuff and make some decisions, and how much that shogun is going to work with them versus butt heads. Just kind of depends. But in general, the further forward in time, the later period you come, the more it's the shogun with the actual power versus the emperor. Now, underneath the shogun, you have provincial lords called daimyo. So the daimyo is going to be, you have the head high shogun, and then the daimyo is going to oversee a large province of land. And that daimyo will have many martial families or samurai families underneath him, the same way a baron will have a barony, but then in the West, you'll have local lords and their lands within that barony. right? So it's kind of the same. You have the head high shogun, daimyos over a whole province, and then individual samurai families within that province. And again, those local samurai are by far the most numerous because they're spanning the whole country, and it's going to range how much prestige or power each one of them has by how much land and money they have. They get money from their land because of the agricultural produce, etc. Okay, so that's a kind of an introduction to the samurai class in general, where we're in medieval Japan. You have the kuge nobility, those are court nobles, and you have the martial nobility, the samurai, and those are also nobles, right? And they're just nobles with military and land responsibilities. Now let's put them in, that's culture, let's put them in history. Samurai dominated Japanese history, politics, and culture for about 700-ish years. And the first 500 years of that, they were warrior, Jimbro meatheads, right? Warrior. And then the last 200 of years of that, there were some political, social, legal things that happened that changed their status a lot. They were still noble, but that's when they get into that last 200 years is when you start to see samurai as poets, swordsmanship as spirituality. If you master calligraphy and master yourself, then you are a true samurai. And the vast majority of that happens outside the SCA period. So the SCA period goes, of course, to about 1607, and something called the Pax Tokugawa, which really changed the scene for samurai, came into being in 1603. So by and large, if you're talking about samurai in the SCA period, you are talking about warrior Jimbro meatheads. So there's that. All right. So when I say that we're focusing on the Warring States period, which is within the Muromachi period, here's what I mean. In about 1330, a shogun family, I believe they were the Asada family, came into power, probably through violence. I don't remember right now. And so that's 1330. And they had some ideas about how the country should be run. The emperor made a big stink about how he didn't agree, and he moved his court south. They had their court in the Muromachi district of Kyoto, which is why their shogunate is known as the Muromachi period, because politically Japan was being run out of the Muromachi district of Kyoto. The emperor was not in Edo, which was the previous name of Tokyo. They were in a different city that doesn't matter as much, and you've never heard of it now these days. So this was known as the Northern Court, Southern Court period. And the whole first part of the Muromachi period is this. When am I going to be done? Hopefully pretty soon. I'll try to be fast. The whole first part of the Muromachi period is this Northern Court, Southern Court period. And the historians that I read had opinions about the general tactics that the Asada shogunate used during the Muromachi period, because about halfway through in the 1460s, I think, the shoguns completely lost control of their daimyo. And this kicked off what we know as the Warring States period, or the Sengoku period. And the Warring States period, it is not an exaggeration to think of this as an all-out battle royale across all of Japan, with all of the daimyo constantly warring against each other to try to claim land and power. So you have the Muromachi, the Asada family begins the Muromachi period. Halfway through, we have the Sengoku period, and then a guy who's super interesting in history, his name is Oda Nobunaga, he takes out the Asada shogunate in the 1570s. But the Warring States period continues on for a little while, for about another 30 years, until the Pax Tokugawa takes effect in 1603. So you've got Muromachi period, Warring States period starts, the Asada or Muromachi shogunate ends, and then the Warring States period ends with the Pax Tokugawa. So that's kind of the timeline that we're looking at here. And the later you are in that Muromachi period, in that Warring States period, the more the country's just been at war, literally for like over 100 years. So the types of things that long-term warfare cause are happening in terms of, you hear a lot about their currency being rice or being based on rice, because food is an issue in a long-term warfare situation. I really recommend this book, Rethinking Japanese History. If you are interested in more details, it is by Amino Yoshihiko, and it's been translated into English and it's available on Amazon. So that kind of puts us into perspective in culture and history of what the samurai, who the samurai were in the SCA period, and in this later part of the period, what's going on. So now we're gonna pause and get dressed. I'm gonna have to reach out of frame to get my stuff. So, oh, I've made a mess. Everything is happening. Okay, so this is a kasode. It is the precursor to the modern kimono, and this is the basic garment for this whole, the more you get into the Muromachi period, very quickly, this becomes the garment, right? I'm gonna grab the one I made for my daughter so you can see it a little smaller. Hopefully it's in frame. It looks a lot like a kimono. The major differences are the sleeves. That's the biggest, most visible difference. Kasode actually means small sleeve. Sode is sleeve, kasode is small sleeve. This garment began as the undergarment, the skin layer like a shift or chemise. And if you look at Japanese fashion before the Muromachi period, you see these layers of big, wide open sleeves that look a lot like Chinese court fashion, because that's what they were based on. They were in a period of importing a lot of fashion and culture from China. And so what happened is it began in the merchant class, where they started taking this kasode small sleeve garment that was an undergarment and making layers of it out of other fabrics, because it was much easier and less fabric intensive not to make those big sleeves. If you've made large sleeved garments, you know how much fabric that takes. And this country, the more you get into the period, the more there's just war all over the place. So they made these, and this went from merchant class up through the higher, more wealthy merchants into the samurai class, and eventually into the kuge nobles as well. And so what this is, I in the description of this video, I will link a Google document that is my handout about how to make a kasode. But basically, the other difference between a modern kimono and a kasode is there is no back seam on a kasode. And it's also a very attainable beginner garment to make, because you don't need a lot of proportional measurements to make it fit a certain way. In the medieval period, Japanese fabric was woven on paneled looms, and each panel would be 8 tsune wide. Now, similar to the fact that a medieval inch is not as standardized as a modern inch, a medieval tsune is not as standardized as a modern tsune. I make my panels the equivalent of 7 inches, but a lot of people go 8, some people go a little more. It's not any more or less historically accurate for it to be more towards that 7-inch, or more towards that 8.5-inch zone, because like maybe your grandma had bigger hands and requested a slightly larger loom. It also doesn't specifically have to fit you any particular way, because maybe Uncle Jerry has narrow shoulders and Uncle John has broader shoulders, but they're both getting casote made on the same loom. So it's okay for it to not be like perfect, and I want you to really give yourself grace. Nobody's coming at you with a measuring tape here. So the way they would do this is they would weave the fabric on looms, and it would either be a 1-paneled loom, a 2-paneled loom, or a 3-paneled loom. So the body would be, I mean, for a child's garment like this, it would be 2 panels, but for an adult, it would be a 3-paneled piece that is one long strip that can go from, you know, floor around your shoulder to floor, and then they would cut up the middle and make a little teardrop for the thingamajiggy collar. And then from there, I don't know if you can see this, they just slap another rectangle, just a single panel rectangle to the front, and then this collar piece would just be a 1-paneled strip, so about that 7-8 inches wide, and you sew along, and when you get to that corner coming off the collar, you just kind of work it diagonally, going down, and when you're out of your fabric, you sew it, and you're all hunky-dory. All right, so that's the casote. And when you're putting on your casote, it's going to start with this skin underlayer. Japan had access to the Silk Road, so any fabric that existed, Japan is going to have access to, because they're not able to produce, I mean, obviously they're still producing their internal silk, and their flocks of silkworms are a thing, but they're not producing as much because they're at war at that time. So trading for fabric, trading for imported cotton was the stuff. So this is just simple white quilter's cotton, and it is a fashion flex to be wearing that as my casote, because I can afford this beautiful white imported cotton next to my skin, right? So my casote, you can't see this, my casote, my under casote here is full length down to my ankles. Your skin layer does not have to be that long. I'm gonna go with my left side on top. This is my left on top here, and that's because a body for the funeral would be prepared with the right side on top, but I am not dead and not going to my funeral, so my left side is on top. Now this skin layer in earlier periods would have been shorter, and your hakama would be belted over this. I'm not intending to wear hakama today, or with this particular under casote, so it is longer. Now, yeah? I'm gonna be done soon, okay? I'll try to hurry up more. For formal occasions, that a hakama would still be there, and if you were a man, obviously the hakama would still be there. But similar to how fashions carry forward in formal wear for longer, if I, as a samurai class woman in the Muromachi period, was going to my local daimyo's court or the shogun's court, I would be wearing red or pale green hakama on top of this skin layer, and then other layers would be belted on top of that. So the hakama are there to give shape as formal wear, but they're not intended to be seen, similar to a petticoat. All right, so then I am going to put another casote on top of this, and I really want to stress that it's just casotes all the way down. So I have this really light blue linen here, and it is just another casote. It is exactly the same shape. It's casotes all the way down. That is the fashion of the period. Get my own sleeve in there. Get in there. I'm failing at getting dressed. There it is. Okay. And you just put layer upon layer upon layer of them. I do not fold them together. Each layer gets its own fold. And I want my layers of collar to show, partially because that helps the skin layer absorb any sweat, so my overlayers, which aren't going to be washed as much probably, stay cleaner, but also because more layers, more better. You're showing status with the number of layers you're wearing and the fabric that they are made out of. One thing to note, they absolutely did, oh, I forgot to finish the end of this. All right, this would be finished and it would be top stitched. They absolutely did take false collars and fold them underneath to make it look like they're wearing more layers than they actually were, because, you know, if your layers are what's showing your wealth and status, and those layers are only showing, what am I doing here? And those layers are only showing at the collar and maybe the sleeves, then why wouldn't you wear a false collar, especially in the summer, right? So I've now got through apparently 3 layers of cassoulet on here. And this would be the minimum that a noblewoman would wear. Just your skin layer and your next layer is not enough, because your top layer, whatever that is, however many top layers you have, is your fashion statement layer. So I'm gonna take my obi and belt it real quick here. So with regards to the obi, it's gonna be 1 panel wide, right? So like 7-8 inches, folded in half the long way like a hot dog bun, and finished. We do not have the wider obi in this period. And it's gonna go around me a couple of times. Well, I guess this one's gonna go around me a few times. I should have left myself more. Well, let's see if we got another one in us. Ha 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 ha, victory. All right, so I am now going to put this underneath, tie it in a little granny knot, and that is how obis are tied in the Muromachi period, right? And in Warring States period, is we do not have the wider obi that we have later on. We just have a single panel folded in half and finished. Like I said, this top layer is my fashion layer. By having my top layer just folded and belted like this is saying I'm classic, I'm conservative, or it's a normal casual day. The other ways that a cassoulet would be worn, your top layer could be worn, is, come here, there's my other sleeve, having sleeve problems, is jacket style. So I could have a 4th cassoulet. Get my sleeves showing so I'm fancy looking. Is jacket style like this. I can throw this on. If it's winter, I am gonna have something called an uchikake, or also for formal occasions, I'm gonna have an uchikake if it's cold, and that would actually be like, this is just a single layer. Uchikakes are lined, they have a padded roll at the bottom to help keep them out, and their sleeve is curved here to keep the wind out. Later you go in period, the more likely it is that this sleeve is curved, and it's the beginning of what we now see as that pocket sleeve that kimono have, but it's not a true detached kimono sleeve yet, okay? So again, I can just have all my layers belted. I can have my top layer jacket style. Something else that was very common in the Muromachi period for women, men would not do this one that I saw, is women could have a cassoulet on their head. And this was absolutely just a cassoulet. It is not a veil, it is not any other type of fabric, it is a cassoulet. And they may have a second obi around like at shoulder level to hold it in place. This is a throwback to an earlier, like it's like a nod to an earlier fashion, but what's on the head is just a cassoulet. The final one that you are potentially gonna see in the Muromachi period for your fashion layer Gotta undo the belts to do this one. Is, come here. Get out of here. Oh, I got a hanging thread. The final one is you belt all your layers. I'm gonna have more dangling and only bring it around twice this time because it's a little bit faster. Do your thing. Tie, tie, tie. There we go. Is you would take the outer layer, once you've belted it, and wiggle on out of just the top layer. Get out of there. So that it's draped down from the belt. So obviously, I can't do that with a second layer. If I only have two, my outer layer would be, like I'd have my undies showing. That's why you need to have at least three. There are artistic depictions of very fine ladies, often having up to 5 layers. Sometimes, like there's